All right, it seems like we're settled in pretty well. Um, let's go ahead and get started, yeah? I am Keith Ford. I am president of State Center Federation of Teachers. I also teach English and Humanities, and my co-presenter.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? I hope. I am Sam Brookshire. I am a at-large representative with SCFT. This is my second year. I am also a vice president of another local union, and I've been teaching since 2016 as well.
Okay, great. Happy to have Sam here. If you are looking at the program, you saw Christine Phillips' name. She is our district level EEO and Title IX director. Um, Initially, when we started thinking about this, it was going to be the three of us. But then she told me that she was supposed to be on vacation today, but that she would be willing to take time out of her vacation and come in and do this with us. And I said, can't really be a labor person and not honor someone's vacation.
Absolutely.
So, so I said, no, we'll just have you look at the presentation. And so she was really, really helpful and went over the presentation, gave us her notes. So we have the benefit of her expertise, and she has the benefit of being able to be on vacation like she deserves. So can everyone see the presentation screen? All right, great. Let's go ahead and get started. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, sir. I'm being ministered to by my wife, who's giving me cough drops and things. Yesterday, I sounded like the Godfather, so this is actually an improvement if you can believe it. All right, here we go. And Alyssa is monitoring the chat. So Alyssa, if um, you have my permission to just interrupt us if there's something in the chat that we need to draw attention to. And thank you for doing that. Alrighty, so we're gonna go through Title IX and the ARs, and how they kind of interlock, and how they speak to each other, the union role, and then we're going to spend hopefully quite a bit of time on best practices. Sam has a lot of experience with Title IX, and has come up with some scenarios that we can walk through together as a group. Um, Alrighty, and we didn't have time to rehearse this because I got sick. So uh, I'll take the first little bit and then we can just trade off if that's okay, Sam.
I'll
Is
talk
that
whenever you ask me to talk. Who
okay?
knows what I'll say? I'll definitely.
Sounds good. All right, so just a really brief history of Title IX. It's been around for a little bit more than 50 years. Um, it's designed to provide individuals protection against sex-based discriminatory practices, significantly broadened in the 80s. It's presently housed in the Office of Civil Rights in the Department of Education. And I say presently because if if Project 2025, um, if parts of it relative to Title IX get enacted, then it will be moved to the Department of Justice, and we can talk about that later on. Um, it is, on the one hand, criticized for not doing enough to protect victims of sexual violence, and also criticized as lacking due process for the respondent. There's also some fun like favorability things out there. Like it's one of the only federal programs that's actually been proven to decrease obesity because it encouraged women in sports, and you can actually track the data on that. Um, both of the criticisms, though, stem from the role of the arbitrator, the hearing officer, to determine guilt and the attendant consequences. So, and we'll get more into that in a minute. There's a lot of recent activity, which Sam, maybe you can expand on this, in California that's focusing on strengthening the investigations and the follow through on consequences.
Yeah, recently there was a lot of investigation, specifically in the CSU and UCs, right? So not necessarily at the community college levels, but especially in California State University and University of California programs. There was a state audit that was completed in 2023, I believe, as well as a massive audit from the chancellor's office law firms. And the reports from both of those pretty clearly showed every Cal State campus struggled with understaffing, insufficient funding in the Title IX offices, a lot of turnover in staff and administration in general, and in particular in Title IX offices. And consequently, the staff that are there are kind of multi-hatted, right? They're other disciplines that are then being given also the role of having to work in Title IX situations, right? So the result of that is a lot of inadequate or ignored results or investigations, sometimes no discipline or actions taken, or the discipline and the actions being taken have taken too long, right? Or sometimes they'll just be closed investigations with no sort of sufficient justifications or any of that. And one of the biggest recommendations from those audits and the investigations was preventing any positive employee recommendations for those found guilty of sexual harassment. And I think that's kind of a big takeaway we want to remember here is that
Mhm.
this was at CSU and the UC level, but the state chancellor, the recommendations to the state chancellor's office will trickle down into the CCCs as well. And that was one of the biggest recommendations. So
Okay, so let's go into standards and processes. So most Title IX complaints are downgraded. I would say probably 95% of the complaints that are filed either by the union office or by a member that we are then looped into get downgraded. And this is because they have to meet each of three standards. They have to be, the allegation has to be severe, pervasive, and objectively offensive. And SPOO for short, which is a little bit weird, but we like acronyms. So the way that this is written is the EEO coordinator from the district, so this would be Christine, she determines whether those standards are met. And then the case is referred to an investigator if a hearing is needed, to see if a hearing is needed. And then it's referred to a hearing officer. And that hearing officer is always an outside entity. The respondent, who's the accused in the case, and the complainant, the accuser, both have opportunities to provide and respond to evidence.
So
Um,
sorry to
so,
interrupt, Keith, but
mm,
someone wants to back to severe. How severe? What is considered severe?
mm. So this is one of the problems with with Title IX, and one of the criticisms of it. Who knows? It is entirely up to the EEO, the Title IX officer within your institution to determine that. Now, when it gets to a hearing officer, then it is entirely up to them to verify whether or not those three standards were actually met. But to initialize the investigation and to refer it to an investigator and then later to a hearing officer, it falls entirely on one person. So one of the criticisms is that, well, gee, that those are fairly subjective and they're very broad. Um, they're also meant to be hard to reach, which can permit microaggressive things to go on for a long time, because pervasive usually means ongoing for quite a while. At least that's how I understand the word. Um, but yeah, no, it is not easily defined, and it's entirely subjective. Um, so if that doesn't adequately answer the question, then you're welcome to the club. Um, so um, if it gets to a hearing, then each party in that, so the respondent and complainant, are entitled to an advisor. This is kind of misleading because advisors they're not really there to advise. They're actually there to serve as a mouthpiece during the cross-examination of the parties. Um, so, and then the advisors are available throughout the entire process. So we're gonna try to use the word advisor because that's actually what the law says. But if we slip into representative or representation, it's because that's sort of the realm that we as union people are more familiar with, and that is the role that we provide, even though it's listed out as an advisor. Um, let me back up. Maybe questions so far? Okay, hearing none. Here are the ARs, so the administrative regulations within the district. You'll notice that there are some A's and B's. This is because there were some recent changes to Title IX under the Biden administration that went into effect just this fall. We should expect that there is going to be a C to each of these. So there will be a 34, 33, A, B, and C. Same with 34, 34. Because again, if we assume that Project 2025 is going to be a blueprint, um, they're going to roll back some of the Title IX regulations to the DeVos Department of Education under Trump. Go ahead, Sam. I'm rambling.
You're fine. I just wanted to make sure we got a good question in the chat about union as the representative. Is it always a union member or union officer as a representative, or can people have outside counsel? And that's a great question. So that is the reason that Keith kind of gave the caveat earlier of, if we say representative, it's just because that's what the word is that we're used to, but that is specifically why the word is advisor. It's because as union officers, we under, for instance, your Weingarten rights, like we consider ourselves your representative unless you tell us that you do not want us as your representative, because it is your choice, right? But we consider ourselves ready and able and willing to be there as a representative for you at a moment's notice. But no, you do not necessarily need representation by a union specifically. However, we would, as union people, strongly advise that you have some sort of representation, even if you don't want it to be union specific.
Mm-hmm. We've had people, the big takeaway is don't do this alone. So we actually have general counsel that we pay for through member dues, and all members have access to our counsel. We have a law firm that has Title IX specialists, that if you elect to go with us as representatives, we will provide you access to them as your advisor. You can have your own lawyer, you can have your own advisor, you could bring your best friend. And some people have done that. Unless your best friend has legal experience, I really recommend against it, because this is a very, 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 very prescribed area of the law, and it really helps to have someone who is familiar with it. And even if like if you're not necessarily comfortable with me or with Sam or with someone in the union, we're not your primary advisor. Our lawyers are, our legal counsel is. And that is a resource that's there for you free of charge. If you want to pay for your own lawyer, you can. And we've had people, not giving away any details, but we had somebody a few years back that chose not to use us, and they hired their own lawyer, and that cost them several $1,000s. That's up to them. So you can see all the ARs there. It's important to note that Title IX charges are not automatically criminal. In fact, unless it involves a minor, this is a weird glitch in the law that Christine made me aware of. I didn't even know this. The employer, the district, is actually expressly forbidden from filing criminal charges or informing law enforcement without the consent of the complainant. So, like, if I have a Title IX complaint against me that Christine thinks rises to the level of criminality, she has to ask my permission to inform law enforcement, which is, you know, not to put too fine a point on it, bonkers, right? Um, so without escalation to criminal charges, though, the process has previously only impacted the person in their present job. This is changing, and we'll talk about that in a sec. And complainants are legally protected from retaliation. Now, I should note, we're focusing on the faculty side of this, right? We're focusing on the worker. Obviously, if something rises in a complainant's mind to the level of severe, pervasive, and objectively offensive, it's impacted them, and I don't want to minimize that. So there is impact to the complainant as well as to the accused. There could be impact, to educational programs within the district, to vendors, to relationships external to us. But we're focusing primarily on this from a representative side. As I said before, it's usually or historically, it's only impacted you in your present job. That's changing. And actually it changed as of January 1st this year. So I'm putting this one in because it introduces a gray area. So AR 7022 is consensual relationships, and this echoes what Title IX says. So the district prohibits faculty and staff from engaging in a consensual relationship with anybody that you have authority over, whether that is like I'm your boss or I'm your teacher. Okay, but they're not consensual relationships as in and of themselves are not expressly forbidden. They just say in the regulation that they may lead to difficulties, which, I mean, if you ever had a workplace relationship go wrong, I mean, a lot of us meet our spouses at work, and that happens, right? But if you've ever had a workplace relationship go wrong, yeah, of course they lead to difficulties, right? Your working environment can get really tense, even if there's no impropriety on either side. So they are discouraged, but not expressly forbidden. Okay, Sam, do you want to talk about AB 810? This is the change that we were talking about.
Sure. So we have AB 810, don't pass the harasser, is the colloquial reference here, which is very, very recently come into the mix, which is that existing law prohibits a community college district from asking an applicant to disclose information concerning any admin decision or final judicial decision until it's determined that the applicant meets the minimum employment qualifications stated in the notice issued for the position. So this is essentially a barrier in the application process for people who are attempting to apply for a different position than what they maybe currently have. It also allows prospective educational employees to get any full details about a substantiated allegation of misconduct much earlier in the hiring process than it was previously. So this is going to result potentially, if it continues on its current trajectory, in a lot more rejections of applications much sooner than we were seeing in the past, right? And this was, of course, as the reason that this is a colloquially termed don't pass the harasser, this is made with the intention of trying to, like I mentioned earlier, hit the recommendation from some of those investigations that we discussed, like specifically in California, of trying to make sure that employees who have had these types of investigations come out with them being held as, yes, they did in fact violate Title IX, that we're not then just shuffling them to a new institution rather than actually them having to face certain consequences. But as with most legislation that often kind of tries to help target certain issues that our university and higher education systems are asking and begging for from legislation, with the intention being wonderful, it's going to come with some issues regarding creating a lot of barriers for the employment of certain populations, right? Which we're trying to help kind of gain more representation in within our higher education employment.
Yeah, and it's worth pointing out. So I mean, you can see the ellipses in the orange section. Um, so this applies to all higher education, the UCs and CSUs. Except the UCs can't be legislated. So anywhere you see a law that refers to the UCs, the language is the UCs are encouraged to or may choose to do this, so that they can adopt it if they want to, because their charter with the state explicitly forbids them from being legislated. So they have autonomy that we don't have. This law also doesn't resolve things like what happened with the CSU president, where a, a substantiated allegation came out. There was a huge scandal, and instead of getting fired, he got returned back to faculty, and I believe is in San Luis Obispo now, right, working out his career in a tenured job. It doesn't address that. It just addresses new people coming into the system who have substantiated allegations against them. And as Sam said, the benefit here is that by giving the new employer or potential employer access to the full details, they can really see how extreme or how severe this was and decide whether or not to put them in the applicant pool. Whereas before they really didn't have that. It was just, is this a substantiated thing or not? That was it. Before we get into that, so we've covered a lot. Are there any questions so far? I apologize, I can't see the chat. So
I will say that we had a comment in the chat about how does this apply, particularly when we're talking about being unable to report to law, right, unless we get the complainant's permission. How does that factor into things like mandated reporting, right? So I do kind of want to draw attention to that because that's a great question. And so a mandated reporter, you're mandated to report to your corresponding authority directly over the reporter. So that means your boss, whoever that boss is, the boss, whatever that person or entity then is, takes on the liability past that, essentially. But what the mandated reporter status is just essentially you cannot just sit on the information once you've heard it or you've heard something that makes you reasonably assume something is happening. You have to tell your immediate authority above you.
And I mean, thank you for that clarification and thank you for the question. Remember too, if it involves a minor, you can tell the authorities.
Yes.
So I mean, the path, I mean, we do have dual enrollment students. We do have people who are under 18. So if something comes to light in one of your classrooms and you have a student who's 17, say, you would tell your supervisor, but you are also fully within your rights to inform law enforcement because they're minors. Any other questions? Okay, let's plow through. Okay, so the role of the Federation. I'm a Star Trek geek, and so I'm always going to say Federation instead of Union. I can't help it. Okay. I almost have my gold star. So all I have to do is finish one more season of DS9, and I have to watch Lower Decks, which I'm really looking forward to, especially because the last season of DS9 has been a slog. Um, anyway, okay, so because of uh, well, actually, let me back up here. You remember that tension between advisor and representative? Um, so Christine had a bunch of feedback on this slide specifically, saying that I should change it because it's not an area of representation. But, and this is just in the last like 3 to 5 years, through the Public Employee Relations Board, through PERB, which is the legal body that adjudicates any of our employment issues. They have determined that because of the potential impact to faculty members' wages, benefits, and working conditions, which are areas that unions have express purview over, that we do have a duty of fair representation, just like a contract issue. So any member who requests us, we are legally required to provide them with representation. Now, as Sam mentioned, a member can opt out of having us as representatives. If they do, the district will offer you internal representation. Okay, they should tell you that the federation is an option, but at minimum, they are legally required to give you an advisor, provide you an advisor. You can, you know, bring your Labrador if you want instead of us. But I again have to underscore: do not go through this without somebody who knows what they're doing. Okay, um, if you want to bring your own lawyer, fine, but we have really great lawyers who specialize in this area. Um, we also, to flip this around, if you are not the respondent, but if you are the complainant, we also will help you to file the complaint and to assemble your evidence. So that the evidentiary part of this process is daunting. So Title IX statutes allow you to go back as far as 4 years. And that's often how we can demonstrate both severe but really pervasive treatment. Right. So if you have like 4 years of text or 4 years of emails, that's how we demonstrate those kinds of things. But collating all of that, putting it all together, and presenting it in a way that when it gets to the district level, they're going to recognize it as meeting those three criteria and therefore going forward with an investigation. That can be a daunting process that you don't have to go through alone. We can help you. Okay.
I think it's also great to point out too that I think one of the biggest reasons, particularly that the audit and the investigation in California, for instance, finds a lot of the issues with the system revolved around failing, to be colloquial about it, the complainants in these situations. And I think part of that is specifically not to be union minded, but I can't help it because I'm a union person. It's because people assume that union involvement is only something that needs to be triggered when the respondent is under the union, which is just patently a misunderstanding of what the union's role is we're the employee's representative no matter what in this process. We're not just advocates for the person when they're getting accused. We're advocates for the person because they are part of our union, whether they are, and especially when they are feeling like they are getting harassed or, something has occurred that they want to make a Title IX complaint. The union wants to represent you just as much as they want to represent anyone who's a respondent in that situation as well, because our purpose is to advocate for you for whatever your needs are, right? And I think too often there's this assumption from everyone involved in the process that we don't need to talk about the union as part of what your options are unless you're the respondent. If we started embedding the union as actually a part of that entire process, not just for the accused, but the person complaining as well. I think we would see, hopefully, this is my hope-minded hat, a lot better outcomes, because complainants need a lot of support as well. As Keith mentioned, it's a long and grueling and really tedious and frustrating process that we are just more than happy to help you with. We don't want you to go through it alone.
So again, kind of expand on DFR, the duty of fair representation. So this extends even to non-dues paying members. We legally are not allowed to turn you away. If we do, you can sue us. You can take us to PERB, and you'd probably win. So it is important to point out, I appreciated Sam's comments here. The DFR, duty of fair representation, requires that we ensure that a member is given their due process rights. It doesn't mean that we're defending the member, right? And so oftentimes there is a little bit of a confusion, a little bit of a tension point between representing and defending. And what I want to say is, so I mean, we'll have somebody come to us and say, how can you defend this person's behavior? Well, we're not. We're not defending them. What we're doing is giving them access to ensuring their access to due process. And we kind of have a joke on the member rights committee, which is all the member rights VPs, myself, the lead negotiator, and our executive director. So there's 7 of us. Sometimes people get due process right out the door because what they've done is a fireable offense. But they are entitled to the process going through that, right? It is a little uncomfortable sometimes, but that's our job. And so just because we have to represent somebody again does not mean that we are defending or condoning in any way what somebody may have done. So I want to kind of give a little bit of a flow chart here. Sam already kind of touched on this, but we can be involved in any of these processes. So if a student is involved, we're going to represent you, and the college will provide an advisor to represent the student. Okay. And here in all cases as below, the Title IX officer oversees the investigation. So that's Christine. If it's a faculty member and an administrator, we represent the faculty member. The district provides an advisor if requested, but usually the administrator will bring in their own legal counsel. So district legal counsel does not get involved with the representation of an administrator. They either have an advisor like anybody else would, or they bring in their own lawyer. Faculty on faculty is super awkward, but I cannot stress how important it is to go through these processes. Sometimes, if it's necessary, file that complaint. Right? You have a right to be safe in your workplace, to be safe and well treated in your workplace. And if you're not, and if that person is a faculty member who's doing that, you need to bring that to our attention. Now, the super awkward part is we are legally required to represent both of you, which means that what we've done in this, our policy is one of us represents the complainant, the other represents the respondent, and we don't talk to each other during the process. So it's just apart from one another. And the law firm that we currently contract with on retainer has enough resources, has enough Title IX specialists to where we can offer 2 separate legal counsels as the advisors through that process. It's not our favorite thing to do, but again, all of our members are entitled to due process rights, and you have a right to be safe and fairly treated in this workplace. So if that's happening, if something's happening that does not jive with your understanding of that, file the complaint. Faculty and staff, similarly awkward, right? Because we try to be in solidarity with our CSEA siblings. But if that happens, we represent the faculty member and CSEA represents their member. Questions so far? Hearing none,
I'll
and I want, oh,
touch
go ahead.
real quick too. We got a comment in the chat
Mm,
about how we help support during the investigation things like retaliation. Um,
mm,
I think that's a great question and an important one. And unfortunately, that is one of the reasons that we're giving this presentation, because it is more likely for that type of behavior to occur, unfortunately, when the complainant does not have adequate advocates or advisors or representatives in their corner. They're much more likely to be retaliated against, and that retaliation is much more likely to be successful in
mhm.
in intimidating the complainant into silence or dropping the case. That is one of our massive goals, is to be there to keep that type of behavior in check, to make sure it's logged during the investigation, that it is not being successful in trying to deter the investigation from its goal.
Absolutely. So, oh, I'm gonna get fired up here. Uh, um, so our previous legal counsel, I loved him to death. When a member would say, "Oh, well, I worry about retaliation," he would just go, "Well, they can't do that. It's illegal." Okay. Our current legal counsel is more practical and more realistic. He goes, they're going to retaliate, and it's illegal. And so we document everything, and then we can catch them. So people, look, bullies are bullies. And this is why I get really fired up about this, because I was bullied incessantly as a child, all the time. And I never said anything, right? And there's this idea and there's this shame around being mistreated, where you think, maybe I did something wrong. Maybe I just need to tough it out. What if I say something and it gets worse? Okay. File the complaint. File the complaint. Get us involved. And then we document everything. And if they retaliate against you, we nail them to the fucking wall. You have a right to be safe and protected in the workplace. Okay. Visibility is your friend. One of my very close colleagues, someone very dear to me, she endured a bullying workplace based on race and gender for 4 years before she brought it to us. 4 years of elevated blood pressure, crying herself to sleep, being miserable, being afraid that she was going to get terminated, right? No one deserves that. We got involved. We helped her file the complaint. We helped her amass all the evidence. And you know what? That administrator's gone. It's a long process. It's hard, but it does not have to be a lonely process. Okay? File the complaint. Get us involved. Visibility is so important here. Don't be ashamed of what's being done to you. Fight it with us. And I'm sorry if I'll get off my soapbox now, but I've seen people come to us in tears as a last resort. We should be a first resort. Okay? If this is going on, get us involved right away. Yes, people retaliate because they're bullies. But you know what? Bullies are also cowards. And as soon as somebody else stands up to them, they back out. Okay. Tension points, other than what I just laid out. So, teaching is inherently relational, right? We build relationships with our students. We like them. One of our jobs is to encourage. We are supposed to like make copies of ourselves, right? Make better copies of ourselves. Encourage the next generation of our own profession. And teaching gives us power over our students, which we should remain anxious about. We should always be a little nervous about all the power that we have over them, right? They look up to us, right? And not just for grades, but they look up to us as mentors. That should always be a source of tension and anxiety. Mentorship exposes us to risk, but you cannot mentor people in the classroom alone. It's impossible, right? Because you're delivering content. So you have to actually engage with this person outside of the classroom, which exposes you to risks. So here are some safest and best practices. I'm going to rush through these so that Sam's scenarios can be given a lot of time to. Um, do not Do not follow or friend your students on social media platforms until after they graduate, and only then if they reach out to you first. okay? No social media at all. Don't share your personal cell phone number, okay? Either rely on your office phone number, okay? And I know for a lot of our part-timers, you don't have one. That's not fair. So you can use a Google phone number for safety. Um, I would also recommend that you consider a no photo policy in your syllabus. In other words, so what my syllabus has is says you can only text me on this number. If you send any pictures, I'm gonna block you. I don't care what it is. It could be a picture of a cute otter, and I love otters, right? But if you send me a picture, we're done. Okay. If you meet with a student off campus, consider the environment. Okay. I mean, don't go meet at a bar, okay, or a dark place like a theater. Meet in public in a bright space, preferably with other faculty and preferably with other students. Okay. It a lot of times, look, I mean, all of us have had an interaction where that we thought went very, very well, and that the other person was harmed by, right? Hopefully not majorly, but maybe they were just offended. Okay. You don't want to expose yourself to that in a one-on-one private environment with a student. So always have other people around, always have witnesses. Okay. If you cover sexually sensitive topics in class, make sure that you review that use of material. This is directly from the AR. Review the use of the material with an administrator. Like, I do this. So one of my classes, the theme is sex, desire, and control. And it's humanities of the ancient world. So there's a lot of like naked statues and things like that, right? It's there. And so when I first started teaching that class, I gave the syllabus to my dean and said, this is what I want to teach, right? I think it's going to engage the students. It stays within my course outline of record, right? And so we looked at it together and she said, looks good to me. In fact, I'd take that class. And so that same semester, when I taught that content for the first time and a student came and complained and said I was showing pornographic content, she goes, no, I looked at the syllabus. It's totally within the COR, and this is not pornographic material. It's relevant to the subject. Yeah, but if I hadn't done that, I would have exposed myself to a complaint. And finally, and this actually doesn't have as much to do with Title IX as much as exposing yourself to risk. Go to fastpeoplesearch.com as soon as we get done with this and remove yourself from the publicly available records. A couple of years ago, you probably saw this in the news. We had a young female faculty member who had a mentally disturbed student find her on this website, go to her house, and hold her at knife point until the cops came. It was very scary. Fortunately, she wasn't seriously harmed, obviously seriously traumatized. Okay, so protect yourself as much as you can from this. Obviously, we deal with the public. We take everybody as students. Sometimes there are some people with mental issues and who are unstable. If you make yourself harder to find, so much the better. Okay. Um, before we get to the scenarios, any questions? Okay, I'm going to hand it over to Sam.
Thank you. And yeah, I think this is a really good moment to transition into the scenario workshop because we're talking about the best practices beforehand. Because I really want to stress here in the scenario workshop that I get a lot of criticism sometimes from certain types of people in this profession of this being like the fun police almost. And you can have fun and you can have jokes and you can have really good, positive, funny, meaningful relationships with your students and with your colleagues that also don't open you up to potential Title IX complaints. And that is the goal of today's workshop. I don't want you to leave the workshop scared of these scenarios. I want you to leave the workshop feeling empowered to be able to have those positive, fun, meaningful relationships, but just with these thoughts and considerations in the back of your brain so that you can make a different choice in that moment, a kind of nuanced different choice, so that that positive relationship can maintain, rather than it turning into a soured moment of, uh-oh, you know, my mouth has done me wrong suddenly somehow, right? That's the goal. Okay, so hopefully I hit that goal, but you guys are the arbiters of that, not me. So for each of these scenarios, I'm going to give you, I really want you to discuss and workshop our questions, explore our fears surrounding the potential issues of sexual harassment complaints. But they're very vaguely worded, because sometimes the difference between something feeling like sexual or gendered harassment can be really huge, a very clear red flag, or sometimes it can be a small, subtle, nuanced comment, right? As Keith mentioned, that you walked away from it feeling fine, but the other person walked away from it feeling hurt or feeling attacked or traumatized somehow, right? So these are inspired by my own experiences in union work, but they are all washed clean of anything identifying, and they're vague and they're slightly tweaked for that reason as well. So that even if you think like, oh, this is an interesting scenario, it's a tweak on what the real case is. So try not to be investigators out there. But for each of these scenarios, I'm just going to ask you two questions. How could this go wrong in terms of Title IX, right? And how could this then go right? What are some ways that we can think of to mitigate those wrongs that we identified at first, right? Let's turn those wrongs into great things instead, right? So we leave the workshop feeling a little empowered. So feel free to raise your hand or offer your thoughts for each. If you don't want to say something out loud, you can type it in the chat like we've been doing. If you have something you want to say, but you don't want it to even be in the chat to everyone, you should be able to change who you're specifically sending a message to in chat. You can send it not just to everyone, you can also send it to individuals. Send it just to me if you'd like. I will make sure to keep you anonymous. If you do that situation, I'll share the comment, because I want us to hear your thoughts, but I'll keep you anonymous since you did not want it to be shared with everyone. Okay, so that's what we're going to do. Let's move forward into our first scenario workshop. So this is the first scenario. I've given us a little bit of a low ball here, because, and especially Keith mentioned as well his personal story, which thank you, Keith, for sharing that, by the way. You did not have to. But this is a kind of a similar situation, because I think it's one that people make the most connections with, of these type of gray area situations. We have a visual arts professor, and they are showing ancient art to students. Okay, what are some ways that this might go wrong for Title IX? I would love to hear from people. You can raise your hand. Like I said, you can type in the chat. Now, Keith sits on silence much less than mine. But I love to tell my students, we're going to sit in silence for a minute. Don't be intimidated by the silence. Let the silence percolate.
As an only child, I'm uncomfortable.
Okay, good. So we have someone talking, several of us talking about nudity, right? Either we are showing the depictions of the nudity. Maybe the students are making jokes about the nudity, even about the specific genitalia involved, right? Comments about all of that. Yeah, those are some ways where suddenly we find ourselves in scary territory, right? Where, if people like this joke, then I guess they're fine. But someone might not like that joke, or not think that it's not very funny, right? And suddenly we've become exposed a little bit about that, right? So with that in mind, how are ways that we can mitigate that potential fear of that happening as this visual arts professor? What can we do to minimize that potential? And same response etiquette here. Yes. Content warning. Yep, speaking with your advisors, absolutely, or your department head, having a statement in your syllabus, absolutely. Yeah, and I want to make that clear too, not just having a statement, but actually having a conversation with the students about it as well. So you're doubling up on that, right? You have the statement in the syllabus and you're talking to the students directly. You go, that's one of the things where you go over your syllabus the first day. That's one of the things that you do go over. I know some of us probably skip over some of parts of our lengthy syllabi for those of us in here, but that's the one you don't. That's one of the areas you don't, and that way you have done it twice, right? We've wrapped ourselves up in some protection. Good, excellent, thank you. Let's do the next scenario. Okay, this is number 2. A professor compliments a student on a new haircut. Okay. What are some ways that there's potential for this to go wrong from a Title IX perspective? Let's be creative. Let's percolate. Good. I'm seeing favoritism, bias, or preferential treatment.
Flirting, yeah.
Flirting, yes. Right? Absolutely. And I want to say too, is just taking the compliment the wrong way. That wordage is great as well. We want to remember too, for what it is worth as it currently stands, Title IX is about gender and not just sexual in nature. So if this is someone who maybe presents gender-wise differently than we expect, maybe they don't appreciate the compliment, that the way that the compliment was couched, right? Yeah, excellent. So with that in mind, and this is actually like I can I'll share a little bit. This is one that I still work on for myself because I'm somebody that I tend to compliment around when I see people because I'm always looking at people's clothes or their hairstyles. I'm always like, oh my gosh, I love your hair. Oh my gosh, I love your clothes. And I still work and practice this for myself. What are some ways that we can now turn this right? We can mitigate this. How can we maybe phrase that compliment differently? Yeah, someone's commiserating with me. It is hard, especially hard when you're like you've been brought up with like I have a lot of southern and eastern states people who brought me up. So I'm always like that's my icebreaker is to compliment something going on your body. It's like, oh my gosh, you're looking gorgeous today. It's like, mouth. I like your hair, but not that much. Is great. I love Ignore it. Okay, so honestly, I want to draw attention to that. That's a great response is sometimes it's okay to just drop the compliment. And what you can do in that moment is you can take what you're desired and you can take it back to the desk for 10 minutes and work on if it's really important to you that you like wanted to like show that student your appreciation, work on the wordage and then come back to it later. Like that's okay. That's something you can do. For instance, I've worked for myself now on instead of going directly to the compliment, I say, your hair is different. How do you feel about it? And that tells me then if it's okay for me to advance with the compliment, right? Because if they say, oh, I don't like it that much, or like, then you can commiserate with the student instead, right? Yeah, excellent. Thank you. Next scenario. Wow, we're shooting along. You guys are much more responsive than some
I
of my
will
students are in our
I
workshop.
will say, if I can interject really quickly,
Yeah.
it's also important to note, right, that so I mean these are all real scenarios, but these are real scenarios that resulted in the filing of a complaint. It didn't necessarily go to a hearing.
Yes.
So if to come back to the haircut thing, like if you are complimenting somebody very vocally and very obvious, or at least very potentially obviously flirting with this person uh, every day, then now we're kind of getting into severe and pervasive and objectively offensive. But if you just say it once, then what's going to happen in the investigation is you go, you know, I shouldn't have said that. I'm sorry. And it just gets downgraded and it goes away.
And
Um,
that is why lots of Title IX, offices as well as districts have the informal resolution step,
mhm,
right? That's why that is embedded in the law, and that's such an important thing in the law, because a lot of complaints often hit and die in the informal resolution, because we
mhm,
see that majority of them are not those severe, pervasive, right?
mhm,
Objectively offensive. It's usually misunderstandings, a moment where, we made an assumption about kind of what our humor was, and we thought it was going to be funny, but somebody else didn't think it was funny, right? Or vice versa, right? They thought it was funny. I didn't think it was that funny. Things like that, right? Thank you, Keith, for that caveat. So our third scenario, a child development professor shares stories about their own children. Okay, from a Title IX perspective, how might this scenario go wrong? Yeah, so thinking about parenting, right? So this idea of the parenting realm. Thank you, AJ. Remember too, if we're having an issue here, gender as well as sexual nature. See, someone says making, if the students are kind of close in age to the children, maybe we're talking about similar generations. Good. We might hit with offense. Someone talks about parenting style. Excellent. Right. If we talk about somebody who is potentially talking about corporal punishment type of situations, lots of differing, very strong emotional opinions about that, right? Maybe a student has difficulty conceiving. Great, great thought there. Yeah. Someone says might be seen as pushing like a heteronormative perspective, right? So thinking about the way that we are phrasing who the parents are in that situation. Yeah. So with these in mind, how can we keep our personal touch in this moment as that professor while trying to minimize the potential for a complaint in this regard? So people are still saying, oh God, I do this all the time. Yeah, no, I do too. I actually do it far less than I used to. I've worked on it on myself, because Keith and I are very similar. dispositions, and that we're very open. We don't really have things to hide kind of about who we are, like what we're doing. So if we have something that we relate to what's going on around us or our background or our home, we're just kind of like, oh yeah, that happens with my kid all the time or whatever. And it's like, well, sometimes people don't want to know that stuff or not that keen on knowing it, right? Offer it as a hypothetical instead of referring to your own children. That's great, right? Making the story, taking the story, it's still your personal story, but we're just changing the wordage a little bit of it, making it a little more impersonal. Good. So maybe taking out some of the like kind of explicit details of the story that might make things a little more uncomfortable somehow for a student. Yeah, good. Thank you. Okay, next scenario. I think it's good. So a student wants to contact a faculty member outside of work. And I struggled really hard to make this as vague as I possibly could and kind of change it. But that's where I ended up, because there's just so many different scenarios here that this could travel down. Yeah. Office hours. Yeah. So how are these things going to go wrong here? And my, oh my, the sky is the limit for how this could go wrong. Don't feel like any answer is a wrong answer, because honestly, probably all of your answers are right answers. All of, yeah, someone's just said in the chat, all of them. Every wrong way you think of this is going, yep, every single one of those. Oh, but we're already getting some suggestions for how to make it right instead. Remind students of your office hours. Excellent. Or maybe schedule a Zoom at a different time. I like that. Oh, someone has also said to me, like the specifics of why the student wants to contact you are kind of important here. Yeah, absolutely. Let's get some details about what this contact entails before we just start making a meeting, right? So what is it that you're seeking? Are you seeking help on your paper? Are you seeking, are you having trouble accessing the Canvas? Like, what is it that you're trying to get from me? And if it's them just being like, oh, I heard you talking about, being an artist, and I wanted to, I don't know, talk to you about art stuff. It's like, well, maybe I'll meet you at the library at an art class where there's lots of other people around, right? Meet in the cafeteria. Absolutely. Someone said, you don't know the student's intentions. Oh, and speak to your advisor. I love that too. In fact, that actually can be really beneficial in a Title IX situation, because that leaves a trail, right? That lets that in a Title IX investigation, that is further evidence potentially, right? Love that. Yes, and this is another reason why I wanted to have this conversation about, and this scenario specifically, I wanted to have embedded in the workshop, because students want to have conversations all the time outside of class, right? And about not class stuff, right? Walking as you guys are walking to the parking lot or walking to the cafeteria. And we often have students, confiding in us about why maybe they're not doing well. Yeah, absolutely. And those are all really important like parts of our job, right? So trying to think of ways that we can, almost like think of this workshop as a fire drill. Does that make sense? Right? It's not very often that the building catches on fire, but it's really important that we go through the fire drill at least once a year, right? And that's so that we know what to do when the building catches on fire, right? Okay. Yeah, and
So,
that's a good important point too, is we're often alone with a student sometimes, especially if you're doing office hours, right? So yeah, it's just kind of really important to think about what we're going to do in this scenario, right? How are we going to respond when the student is like, "Can I have your number?" It's like, "No, no, you cannot have my number." "But why are you asking for my number? Can I help you in some other way that doesn't involve you having my personal number?" Right? Yeah. Thank you.
yeah, it does involve, I mean, some of these involve some firm boundaries. I think, Sam, if you could talk a little bit more. So Alyssa and Karen and a few other of our female colleagues have mentioned being hugged, like, without their consent. And I feel like this is something that unfortunately is more likely to happen to a female instructor.
Yes,
What can we talk a little bit about what we
it's
should do with
happened to
that?
me too. First of all, you are not alone. And that's a really important thing to, first of all, remind students if students ever confide in you about stuff like that as well. Just a reminder that they're not alone is always really important. And you are not alone. This has happened to me too. So practice. Practice. Like, I cannot stress it enough. We live in a kind of a time where we're told often to just kind of like mitigate any discomfort by going with the flow, but students need authority as well as kindness and warmness, right? And in those moments, I want you to remind yourself that you are an authority as well, right? So they need to learn from you what is and isn't appropriate behavior necessarily, right? Because what we don't want is for a student who has those types of kind of looser boundaries, we don't want them to do that to someone who might take advantage of that, right? And then they've gotten into a whole other issue, right? Where now they've become embroiled in a much worse situation. So you can be the first person to help them draw that boundary, to say, if the hug has happened, you say, thank you so much for wanting to show me how, you care, and all of that. And I feel the same way. Please don't hug me again, though. I'm just not comfortable with that sort of physical touch, but I really appreciate you wanting to express to me your, how much you like me or how much this conversation meant to you, etc. Right? Like, I appreciate that. You're affirming while also setting the boundary, right? And you want to make sure that you're reminding yourself in that moment that it's not just for your benefit, although it is for your benefit from a Title IX perspective, but it is also for the student's benefit. They need your mentorship, right? In that moment, to understand what the appropriate boundary is, right? That would be what I would say there. And that's an excellent question and scenario to bring up. Side hug with no touch.
Yeah.
Earlier in one of our other presentations was doing, he was like, "I'm so sorry, I have germs and cooties. Don't, let's elbow touch," right? And I was like, yeah, that's a great thing to do with students. Not even fist bumps, not even high fives. I don't want to touch your open palm. My palms are sweaty, by the way. Let's just elbow touch, right? Okay, I think we're not going to have time for the rest of our scenarios, but I think that we hit a ton of really important conversations in these workshops, so we can move forward to the end of the workshop. But we did have a couple in there as well. And if you ever, guys, by the way, want to like ask me for some more type of scenario workshop situations like this, feel free to reach out to me. I'm more than happy to have a conversation with you, kind of one-on-one about the nuances of what can and cannot lead to potential Title IX issues. Okay, but I'll hand it
I
back over to Keith to kind of to shove us off.
Thank you, Sam. I really appreciate that, and really appreciate all the thoughtfulness of those scenarios. I did want to just give another personal experience that kind of conveys another strategy. So, um, our students, because teaching is relational, because there is a certain kind of emotional attachment that a student might develop with you, right, for whatever reason. I had a student a few years back, female student, confide in me that she was being abused, and that she had been a victim of sexual violence in the past. And so she was routinely suffering from psychological triggers, and she would need to step out of the room and just kind of center herself. The first time that she did it so abruptly that I was really worried about her. And so it was a 4 hour class, and so I dismissed everybody for a break, and I found her in the hallway, and she was crumpled down in a ball, not crying, but really obviously disturbed. And I wanted, so I'm a dad. I've got 3 kids, 2 girls, and I wanted to care for this young lady like a dad, right? I wanted to go and I wanted to hug her, and I didn't. And instead, I just stood with her and I asked her what I could do, asked her how I could help, and what I kind of lucked into that. I lucked into it because I knew that I don't want to be touching people, right? But I lucked into something that she expressed toward the end of the class, the end of the semester, by giving her, like, by demonstrating a coping mechanism that wasn't centered around physical consolation. She was then, she felt empowered to do something beyond a physical response. So it kind of helped break a cycle for her. And she was able to then objectively deal with the problem from a mental perspective instead of saying, I have this physical, emotional trauma that I need to mitigate and respond to in an only physical way. Um, and that was really awkward for me as somebody who I have several members of my family, both female and male, who are victims of sexual abuse. And so I wanted to physically comfort her like I would have a family member. But instead of that, I was able to give her a, a, a resource that broke her out of that cycle. So it's, I know that a lot of this seems kind of compassionless, but it isn't. And these alternative ways of dealing with scenarios that Samantha has kind of delved into and that we've discussed give our students extra resources to deal with difficult scenarios that maybe they've never been exposed to before, and that will help them later on down the road. Okay, we have a lot of scenarios. I really, okay,
I'm
final thoughts or questions?
always like, if you plan for a whole lot, it's easy to
Yeah.
take away.
Oh, I just want to, before we get to questions, I want to draw attention. We put some links in here to the laws, to the ARs, where to file a Title IX report on the district website, and who is your vice president of member rights with your college. And now we can do any final questions. So I put my cell phone number in the chat before, but I'll do it one more time. Grab it. Don't send me pictures.
Or he
Um,
will block you.
please reach out if you need us. And I hope that this was useful. Thank you, Sam, for all the work that you put into this too.
Thank you to everyone for showing up. Have a great rest of Convocation Day.